Hello, I'm MeshCentral, and in this video we're going to take a look at an overview presentation of MeshCentral. So I've prepared a bunch of slides on MeshCentral for a different presentation I had to make, and I figured I'd take these slides and use them again here for a YouTube presentation. So let's take a look at this. So we're going to start by taking a look at download stats. We're going to take a look at the state of social media and an overview of MeshCentral, then hosting costs and a whole bunch of other features of MeshCentral to wrap up the presentation. So let's take a look at download stats first. Now, it is currently mid-2021. These tables and numbers were taken from a snapshot at the end of 2020, but as the years went on, MeshCentral has gotten more and more downloads. The current values of downloads hover around over 1.2 million downloads on NPM, the Node Package Manager, and 1.4 million downloads on Docker Hub. Now, I don't have any official Docker Hub images. Some community members have created Docker Hub images, so those are the ones that I took a look and summed their count. So there's plenty of contributions on GitHub. Contributions include code, they include translations into other languages. I really super appreciate everybody who contributes on GitHub, and also bug reports and feature requests. So thank you so much to all the community members for kind of a very active community at this point. State of social media, we have for MeshCentral, we have a main website on meshcentral.com that has the public server that anybody can try for free, but most people choose to download MeshCentral and run their own server. In that case, you may want to interact with other users. The way you do that, of course, there's a YouTube channel, and this is youtube.com/c/meshcentral. There's GitHub, which is my favorite place to interact with the community members, especially since the editor allows you to put images. So if I want to take a screenshot and put it inside GitHub to respond to somebody, I can do that. So that's really great. There's Twitter. This is probably the best place to get up-to-date, quick information on what's going on with the new versions of MeshCentral. There's Reddit. This is a Reddit forum. The editor is more limited. I can't put images, but I do participate there when I can. So in addition to all the social media outlets, of course, there's plenty of contributions. There's plenty of comments on MeshCentral, and I really appreciate those. The comments are coming from YouTube, they're coming from GitHub, they're coming from Reddit. And so thank you so much for all your participation and all the great comments that are coming back from the community. The Twitter visits, the Reddit visits have gone up, and in the last year or two, so it's just been absolutely wonderful. Another thing that's not really of consequence, but kind of fun, Google has taken MeshCentral and the MeshCentral Router. Those were two open source projects that were picked and are archived on archival film and stored in the Arctic North for 1,000 years or more. So that's a great way to know that MeshCentral will be around for a long time. So, MeshCentral overview. Now, as you know, MeshCentral is a remote management website. You can install the website yourself. You can then install agents. The agents will connect to the server, and you can remotely take control of those computers. So you have remote desktop files and terminal and so on. So that's how it works. Now, there's plenty of other videos on how an introduction to MeshCentral and to those specific features, so I won't go here on those topics. One thing that's really wonderful about MeshCentral is that there's not only the desktop site, but also a mobile site. If you access MeshCentral through a mobile phone, for example, you'll get a special lightweight site for that device, tailored for that experience. One of the biggest differences between the desktop site and a mobile site is the remote desktop, where the way you control the mouse, the way you scroll the screen and so on is very different on a mobile device because you have obviously touch. The deployment of MeshCentral is very fast. All you really need to know if you're an IT expert is npm install MeshCentral. So npm is the node package manager, install MeshCentral, and in a few minutes you'll have it downloaded. Then you node underscore modules MeshCentral that will run it, and you have your server deployed, running and working. At that point you can start changing the configuration, but what's really nice is that in a few minutes you can get started, have a working server, try it out, and then go from there. MeshCentral deploys everywhere. So AWS, Google, Azure, any major cloud provider. As long as you have a Linux instance or a Windows instance or even macOS instance, you can download the MeshCentral using npm, and you run it and no problem. You can even download and install MeshCentral on a Raspberry Pi. So a small $35 computer will run MeshCentral just fine. So MeshCentral can also scale. It has its own built-in database, but I do recommend that you use MongoDB for anything production, or if you want to scale to a large number of devices. So you install MongoDB and have MeshCentral use that database. You can also do TLS offload if you want to offload the work of doing the encryption over to another computer in front of MeshCentral. You can do that. MeshCentral supports reverse proxies. So in this case, you have a reverse proxy like Nginx or Apache or others. And what you would typically have on your server is a single public IP address. You would have a single port 80 and port 443, but you would have multiple DNS names that point to that address. And then what you do is you have your browsers, they come in, they resolve that IP address, they tell the reverse proxy what name they use to resolve to that IP address, and then the reverse proxy uses that information to forward the traffic to the right container or service that you have in the back. So MeshCentral plays well with other services behind a reverse proxy. This is super important to lower hosting costs and to basically use your server resources as efficiently as possible. MeshCentral supports server peering, so you can have two MeshCentral servers. You will need to have a MongoDB database set up with change stream turn on. But once you have that, you can have two or actually more servers running in parallel, and you can load balance with a reverse proxy the connections between your servers. Now, MeshCentral also supports a LAN mode and a WAN mode. A WAN mode would be what you typically would deploy in the cloud. So in that mode, the server cannot connect to any computers or cannot scan a local network or something because it's not on any local network, it's on the cloud only. In LAN mode, which is really the default when you first install MeshCentral, in LAN mode, then you can have the server reach out on the local network. And what happens is that by default in this mode, the agents will broadcast or multicast on the local network to find the server. So you can have, for example, here I have a picture of a Raspberry Pi with a MeshCentral sticker on it, and you just install the Raspberry Pi in a little closet or something, next to a switch, and then you have your local network computers connect to that server, and they're able to get managed that way. So both modes are supported. There's also a hybrid mode that supports both WAN and LAN modes simultaneously. MeshCentral supports Let's Encrypt built in. So you can, once you get your MeshCentral server set up and you have you own a DNS name and you point it to the server, you can use your port 80 here to register to Let's Encrypt and get a certificate. MeshCentral will automatically reset itself when it gets a certificate, and it will automatically renew it every 40 days or just about. And so you get the green padlock on your MeshCentral server completely for free as part of the wonderful Let's Encrypt service. So this is another way where you can lower costs. You do not need to pay for a commercial certificate. Another way that MeshCentral scales well is that when activated, MeshCentral can bulk read and bulk write to the database. So what you think about it as a way for MeshCentral, instead of doing one write to the database and waiting for an OK and then doing another write, what it can do is it can bunch a lot of writes together and make a single request and get a single OK from the database for all those writes. So it's much more efficient, and as you scale to a lot of devices, then this becomes important for server performance. Another thing that's interesting about MeshCentral is that it supports multiple database backends. So we talked a little bit about MeshCentral cooperating really well with other Docker containers. So if you have an existing infrastructure with lots of containers, you can add MeshCentral. But of course, if you have a backend that is MySQL, MariaDB, or MongoDB, you want to just be able to use whatever database you have in the backend and just reuse that. So 4 databases are supported by MeshCentral. The AnyDB one is the built-in one. So if you have nothing, we'll just use that. But otherwise, I do recommend you use a more professional database. Multi-language support. So MeshCentral supports translation into multiple languages. Right now it's 15 languages. It's always growing as I get more contributions. The code for the server, the web pages, for the tools are all built in such a way that you can have the tools auto-detect what language the browser or the OS is using and automatically display the right language. You can always override it, but by default it comes to the right language. And this is really wonderful for people using MeshCentral worldwide and other geos. MeshCentral hosting costs. So one of the things about running MeshCentral is really trying to minimize the cost of hosting. So, in the past, I built MeshCentral version 1. It was built on Microsoft SQL with Windows Server requirements and so on and so forth. And so you ended up with easily $1,000 a month hosting costs for running such a big server with the RAM required and so on for the database and so on. Well, with MeshCentral 2, it's built in Node.js. It can use MongoDB. It can use its own database. It can basically run in a very tight virtual machine. And so we're talking about at the minimum you can run MeshCentral on AWS is $4.76 or something per month plus traffic, but a reasonable instance will be about $15 to $30 a month for something fairly capable. And of course, as you need to scale, if you want a very large instance, you can run MeshCentral 2 on a around $200 a month instance, and you will have absolutely plenty of RAM, plenty of CPU, and so you'll have no problem scaling. MeshCentral.com currently has 14,000 devices connected to it, and so it's around $50 a month hosting costs for that. So it gives you an idea that you can probably do 100,000 devices at that kind of price range. And of course, that's way better than what I used to have with MeshCentral 1 with Microsoft SQL and all the licensing that involved in running Windows, where you would easily run over $1,000 a month. Another way we reduce hosting cost is that the agent and the server fully supports compression. So we do compression when we send agent updates, when we do JavaScript update to the agent, or when we do WebSocket traffic, we support and run WebSocket compression. So this will typically get you from 10% to 50% less traffic being sent and received to the agents or to the browser. So it's quite significant cost saving. Some of these options are turned on. For example, updates and JavaScript being sent to the agent, that's automatically compressed. But WebSocket compression, you have to turn that on if you want it. And so I won't go into the figures, but there's quite substantial savings in turning on compression. And to do it, you go in the settings of the JSON, the config.json, and you can turn on WebSocket compression for the browser side and agent WebSocket compression for the agent side, and you should see fairly good compression savings. And here's more numbers on the size of, on the compressed size of the updates when you have that turned on. Okay, another topic here, I want to switch gears and go to MeshCentral and Android. So we do support a Android agent. It's on the Google Play Store. You can download it on your Android device. The website has a QR code. You scan that and it will pair the agent to your server. And then when you click connect, it will connect and you will have access to your Android device from MeshCentral. So very cool. Also allows you to remotely view the screen. Now, there are limitations because of Android. You cannot remotely do remote input, and you must have user consent, but it works very well. You will see the screen of the Android device on the MeshCentral website. There's also support for Firebase Cloud messaging. So basically, even if the agent is not currently running, as long as it's installed, then you can go on the MeshCentral server, you can type a little message and it will pop up on the user screen, and then they can tap and go in the agent and activate the agent. So that's really fun. The way that that's done, because of how the Firebase messaging works, MeshCentral.com has to send all the messages. So basically, MeshCentral.com is acting as a relay for other servers. So once you turn that on, then whatever server you have can send a message to MeshCentral.com, which will then relay it to whatever agent you have. Now, the agent will not send messages back typically or at all through MeshCentral.com. What happens is that the message will pop up, and then it will cause it can cause the agent on the Android device to connect to your server, and that's how you get your feedback. There's also a way, so the Android agent also serves as a second factor authentication. So if the users select that, then when you log into your MeshCentral account, you can pick to have your Android device be the second factor. It will pop up a screen, you say I accept, and you're logged into your server. So it's a really professional way of getting two-factor authentication. Very fast, you hit I accept, it's good. So it's very professional and it's completely free. MeshCentral for macOS. So we have an agent for Mac. You install it, you'll see the Mac device, you'll be able to move the cursor and so on from the MeshCentral server. One thing that's very interesting is that the Mac OS agent is compiled both for 64-bit x86 and Apple Silicon binary. We have a universal binary that includes both, but as the agent gets updated later by updated servers, then only the Apple Silicon or x86 binary will be sent, depending on what the device uses. So you start out with a universal kind of large binary, but then the updates will only be the one that you need for that device. So that's really cool and very efficient. MeshCentral security. If you go on the MeshCentral.com website, you'll see a PDF file with all the security features of MeshCentral. This is a often requested topic, like what's the security of MeshCentral? So obviously, it's a big deal when managing a lot of devices. You want to be able to do two-factor authentication, Let's Encrypt, strong cryptography, TLS 1.3, and so on and so forth. So it's all there, and you can take a look at the PDF for the latest stats on that. Now, one thing we've done is we've contracted a company called IOActive. It's a famous security company. They reviewed the MeshCentral software, and there's a letter published by them and a report. All that is public, so you guys can go and take a look at that. And of course, This is, a snapshot in time. So as the code evolves, that does change. But the idea would be that at regular intervals, we would, in the future, get more security reviews and make sure that the security of MeshCentral is very high all the time. Another way that MeshCentral is secured or can be secured is by its support for CloudFlare. CloudFlare is a reverse proxy in the cloud where all your requests for WebSockets, for users, and so on pass through the CloudFlare servers first before going to your server. They're acting as a cache, but they also act as a way to fend against denial of service attacks or fend against any other intrusions. So MeshCentral fully supports CloudFlare, and you can use that if you wish. Another thing that's interesting about MeshCentral is that it has fairly fine-grained user access control. So you can select, if the user has access to a device group or an individual device. You can create user groups, and you can set things like consent policies and access control rights on each of these devices or group of devices with fairly good control. So that's pretty cool. There's a lot of different ways that MeshCentral supports two-factor authentication. We've seen one previously with Android device, but also we have email, we have one-time codes that you can basically print and keep in your drawer. We have FIDO hardware keys, those are USB keys, fully support for that. Touch ID and time codes like the Google Authenticator, things like that where you punch the 6-digit code. So MeshCentral supports all of these two-factor authentication. In fact, there's a way to configure your MeshCentral server to mandate that your users use two-factor authentication, and that's probably a good idea. And so if you're going to use time codes, there's a barcode that the user will scan. You enter your 6-digit ID, you say OK, and it sets up your account that way. For FIDO, you buy this USB key, usually $15 to $20 on eBay. You keep it on your keyboard, and every time you need to authenticate, you can just tap the key. Some keys will have a PIN, so you type the PIN and you say OK, and it authenticates you. In addition to all this, we also support SMS authentication and SMS messaging. So MeshCentral has supports for Plevio and Twilio. Those are SMS services. You can get a free account, and then you set up your account with that information with the MeshCentral in the config file, and then MeshCentral will be set up to do SMS. It looks really sharp and professional to have that set up. MeshCentral also supports Intel AMT. This is active management technology. It's a technology that allows you to access your computers even if they're soft off, even if the OS is crashed. It's basically a hardware agent baked right into the platform. So MeshCentral has an Intel AMT manager that looks and communicates to all the various AMT through various different channels, and it will automatically set up and figure out how to best use AMT. So it has a whole bunch of features. I won't go through them, but you can do Wi-Fi profiles, KVM, user consent. It will automatically pull the hardware inventory. It also supports agent and agentless mode, so you don't have to install the Mesh agent in order to use AMT. You can use AMT alone, and so there's a special device group in MeshCentral for that purpose. There is a full automatic mode, so if you don't know too much about AMT and you just want MeshCentral to take care of it, then you could select a policy full automatic, and MeshCentral will just make sure to use or set up and use AMT as best as it's capable of. You can also set up AMT using a USB key. I won't go to that, but there's a way you can do that so that you can have admin control mode with USB key or with certificates, and that is all supported too. MeshCentral Assistant. So in addition to installing the Mesh agent, you can also install the MeshCentral Assistant. It's a little tool that will monitor the agent, or it has an agent built in, and it allows the user to click, request some help, and connect to the server, and then basically that computer will pop up on demand on the server. Now, this is nice because MeshCentral Assistant is signed, so contrary to Mesh Agent, which isn't. So it has, it's signed with a open source certificate, so it kind of is a more trusted application. It does require user consent, so the user has to click to connect, or if the app auto connects, then it will have a user consent box pop up before you can manage the system. But if you're doing remote help instead of remote management, then this is a really great option. So as I said here a bit ago, you can have MeshCentral, the MeshCentral Assistant connect directly to the MeshCentral server, or MeshCentral Assistant can monitor the Mesh agent that's running in the background. So it can do both at the same, or one or the other. So MeshCentral features, we're just going to go through a list of other features that I've not covered so far. We have a wonderful tool called the MeshCentral Router, and this is available for Windows and Mac, and it allows you to port map local ports on your computer that's running the MeshCentral Router to any ports on any remote computer anywhere on the network. So if you want to do RDP, VNC, or any other protocol like Microsoft SQL or whatever, you can just port map that and then run your applications through the server. Really wonderful. It's kind of a VPN replacement in a way. You can also view multiple desktops at once. This is a bit of a bandwidth hog because now you're sending a lot of bandwidth, a lot of traffic to a lot of computers, but it can be really fun to see in real time the remote desktop of all your computers at once. And this includes like Mac and Linux and Android phones. You can see all of that simultaneously and in real time on MeshCentral. There's a built-in chat application, so you can do video conferencing and sending text messages or chat messages or files, and basically you can talk to other users or you can talk to the user on remote computers using this web-based messaging system. MeshCentral supports recording of the remote desktop terminal sessions. So you can do that server side or client side. If you do it server side, you can opt to have all the sessions be recorded on the server. And basically every time a session is started by a technician or something, then you'll have a full recording of it on the server that you can play back using a web-based player. And recently, I added the option to convert the recorded file into a WebM movie, so you can play it on VLC or other media players. MeshCentral has the ability to pull all the hardware asset information. So you want to see what OS, what networking, what BIOS version, what motherboard, and so on a remote device has. You can do that and see it in MeshCentral. There's also a command line tool called MeshControl, MESHCTRL, and that's a tool that allows you to do commands to MeshCentral in command line form. It works on Linux and Windows, and so you can pull all that information using the web interface or the command line interface, and that will work just great. Recently, just added the Android agent on the Amazon store. If you use Amazon devices, then you can just pull the agent on your Amazon device and also remote it. So that's it. That is a very quick overview of MeshCentral. So basically, we just took a look at the social media, look at the download count, looked at some of the highlights of how MeshCentral works and some of the benefits and some of the features, including, of course, the security features, which are super important. Hopefully that is, you enjoyed that. Thank you very much. Take care.